Welcome to In the Know by Diann Schindler. This is Diann Schindler speaking. I'm the host of In the Know, the podcast show. I'm an author, a presenter, a solo nomad, a travel blogger, and a photographer. So this podcast show includes writing tips, travel tips, and my views of life from savvy and thoughtful to quirky and humorous. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to In the Know. Today I'm interviewing, once again, Margaret Best. Let me tell you about her. She was born in New York, graduated high school in Germany, and colleges in Louisiana. She married in Illinois and moved back to Virginia. Then she moved back to Louisiana. She has two sons born in Texas and one daughter born in New Mexico and count them, 8 grandchildren. Now, obviously, you know, she's lived in several states. Well, she's also lived in several countries: Germany, Puerto Rico, Egypt, Japan, and Guam, which we're going to talk about today. She retired from teaching elementary school in Florida before pursuing a career as an author, and we're happy about that because she's written some really wonderful books. Her books are available on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. Now, I'm going to leave in the program notes links to her books where you can buy her books, as well as the photos of her book covers. And her newest book, let me go back. She has 2 memoirs, Unsung Hero and Dandelion Child, subtitled A Soldier's Daughter. Now, if you've been listening, if you subscribe to In the Know, then perhaps you have heard our first interview with Margaret, and we talked about Unsung Hero and Dandelion Child. Now, I will leave a link in the program notes so you can access that previous interview. Her newest book, which is what we're going to talk about today, it's in the genre of memoir/travel. And the title is Guam, with the subtitle, Where America's Day Begins. This book will be available 2021. So welcome, Margaret. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
You know, before we started recording, we were talking about this horrendous pandemic.
Yes.
Now that we're shut down due to this virus, what have you been doing?
I've been writing. I've been writing and writing and writing.
Good
I
for
love
you.
it.
Yeah, good for you.
I've also been helping other people write. And I have been making cards and sending cards to shut-ins.
And you've been making cookies?
Oh, yes. I baked some awful cookies. And then I decided to bake them again, and they got almost awful. So when I bake them another time, they might get good.
So did you eat the awful ones?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid to bake cookies because I'm here
Right.
hunkered down, and when I get bored, I go right for the pantry or the refrigerator.
Correct.
So I have been holding back on baking. Now tell me also, I know that you have been attending your wannabe writers group, but you've been
Oh,
doing that.
yes.
You've been doing that via Zoom.
Yes. We meet on Monday mornings at 8:30 in the morning, and we stop around 12. And we
Wow, that's
each read
fantastic.
what we wrote for that week.
How many are in your group?
18.
Wow. You know, I just joined. The 3 of us joined together in a writers group. We're calling it the D3. D is in
Mm-hmm.
Diann, Donna, and Daryl. Daryl's in North Carolina. Donna is here. She is the erotica writer,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. J, here in
Mm-hmm.
Amelia Island, and I am here in Amelia Island, and we meet every 2 weeks on Zoom. It is incredible what we are doing.
It is.
Rather
It
than
is.
so far, I mean, I'm in another writers group. Actually, it's a novel writing class where we write and then evaluate what we've written with an eye to certain elements and aspect of writing the novel.
Mm-hmm.
But in this smaller writers group, we are each taking a topic each week. So, for example, this past week, my topic was the character arc and the way in which to describe the emotional aspects of responding to progressive complications. Whew, it
Whew.
was it was intense. And the week I mean, oh my goodness, it was really intense, but it was great. And then the week
Mhm.
before, Daryl did point of view, and we talked all about point of view. And then Donna talks about writing sex scenes. But I tell
Mm.
you, it's really a great way to up your craft, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, it's really writing in
Mhm.
isolation, I think, is dangerous. When I work with groups, I ended up having to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. But you've been writing a lot, and I can tell from this list of questions that we're going to talk about today that you have been not only hunkered down, but you've been doing a lot of writing. Now, so tell me what specifically have you been writing?
Well, I write different things. The book I'm writing, I spend maybe 4 hours a day writing about Guam and researching at the same time as I'm writing. Then I write also, I have a lady who's writing her book. She's a veteran, and I'm helping her write her memoir. And so I'm rewriting her stuff, and I try that for about an hour a day. Then I have been writing with a program, spiritual writing,
Hmm.
talking about my ideas of how I became what I am as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also wrote a story about, I left teaching many years ago, and I was not able to write about teaching due to what happened when I left.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden last week, I was able to write, and I wrote a whole thing about what happened on the day I left teaching. And it really struck a lot of chords with my writing group. And it was
Great.
very cathartic for me.
Yeah, so you really you peeled away and touched your
Hmm.
own nerves and then put it down on paper.
Yes. And I
You know,
think writing is something that everybody can do, even though they say they can't.
mm-hmm,
And I tell people who say, "Oh, I've got a story, but I can't write it." I say, record it.
mm-hmm.
Push that little button on your computer that says dictate and dictate it,
Yeah,
and then send it to me and I'll write it.
yeah. I have a friend who wrote a novel and this was her first novel and she hadn't really done a lot of background, but in novel writing. And
Mhm.
a couple of us, she asked us to critique and we did. And she's now back on her heels and hasn't been writing at all. And I keep writing her every day and saying, just write 15 minutes, you know,
Right.
just write 15 minutes every day, and she said, "Oh, I haven't written in so long. And I'm waiting for the muse." I said, "Well, the muse is not going to come to you. You have to practice to get there. You really do, don't you think? Open yourself up and write and
Hmm.
write and write." And
Hmm.
I know when I first start, and if I haven't been writing even in a week, when I start writing again, it's really garbage. But
Yes,
that's okay because you're getting it out and at some point you're going to get. And
that's
so
right.
it's so good that you have decided to create an opportunity for people to come to you, to go to
Yes,
your website so you
yes,
can help them pull out
yes.
these wonderful stories that they have experienced or
Right,
they have in their head.
right. The website that I'm using now is called margaretbestauthor.com.
That's so good that your last name is Best
Yes, I
because
know I'm the best author.
and you're and that's really good, and you've won some awards, and so
Oh, yes, yes, I
yeah,
have. Yeah.
so for those, if you want to hear about the best rewards, Margaret Best Rewards, you can listen. I'll have them listed in the program notes, but you
Mhm.
also can listen to that previous interview that I alluded to. You're concentrating on your memoir and your travel book about Guam, and the title is Where America's Day Begins. It's a snapshot of the beauty and the culture and the history on an island that you call paradise.
Yes.
Tell me about each chapter that you're developing.
The first chapter is just introduction as to how I got there and why I was there. and what I thought I was getting into and what I actually got into. So, and that second chapter is about the land, and it talks about volcanoes. When we were there, a volcano erupted. There are no volcanoes on Guam, but there is a volcano in the ocean, and it erupted, and we talked about that. We talk about earthquakes that happen all the time on Guam, and then we talk about the weather, which is absolutely fantastic, but we do get typhoons. Then I talk about places to go, beaches, and there are so many beaches on the island. We played a game, and we do it here in the United States too, and the game is called geocaching. And with geocaching, you go out and you find a hidden treasure. It's not really a treasure. It's just a hidden something, and it's fun to go find. And in Guam, we were part of a group that put these treasures all over the island, and then you write about the place that you place them. And I saw things on Guam that the normal person doesn't see. They were absolutely fantastic, and a lot of history gets involved in that. We also did something called boonie stomping. Boonie stomping is hiking in the jungle. Didn't do it, but my husband did it. And he went out with all these young people and hiked through Guam. And then he'd come home and he'd take me to the place that they went to in the car. It was fascinating. We saw things that the Guamanians don't see. Waterfalls are beautiful. One waterfall that I love the most, that's highlighted in my book, has no name. It's just a waterfall. We heard it while we were going over a bridge. And so my husband said, "Oh, there's a path." So we walked down the path and we went right to this beautiful waterfall. And we sat there and watched the water come down, heard the water come down. It was absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
I cannot even tell you where it is, because a lot of times we went through Guam and we just stopped and walked and we found something.
When you talk about Guam now, and when you talked about Guam before, you just exude excitement and warmth.
Oh, I mean, Guam is a little known island, very little, not much goes on there, but it is very important to the world peace. We have a large military presence on Guam. It's closer to Asia than anything else, and we can get anywhere from there militarily. They have big Air Force base called Anderson Air Force Base. My brother-in-law was stationed there twice. We have big Navy on the other end of the island, which my brother was stationed there once. We have now the Marines are coming back, so they're coming back to Guam. So we have a big contingency of availability in case North Korea or somebody else decides they want to do something or shouldn't. We can respond.
When you talk about Guam, you talk as if you're living on the island now.
I feel like I am. Writing this book, I really feel like I am. I have so many friends over there.
You're steeped in it all over again. And how long ago did you leave Guam?
Oh, long time ago. We moved there in 2007, and we left in 2009. And I feel like it's yesterday.
What was your favorite experience when you were living on Guam?
The one that I remember immediately is Cocos Island. Cocos Island is a little tiny island inside the Guam. Guam, there are little islands around Guam. This is a little island around Guam. And you go there to Maritzo, which is a little town in Guam, and you go on to a ferry boat. And on the ferry boat, you go across to this little tiny island called Cocos Island. It's a resort. And on that island, you can swim and bathe and all that sort of stuff. We went there the first week we were on Guam with a church group. That's where I found out that you should wear shoes when you're swimming. Because
you don't know what you're going to step into.
You're not going to know what you're going to step on because of all the coral and the rocks. I walked in my feet. It was like I
Mm-hmm.
was walking on glass. It
Oh.
was on sand. It's
Mm-hmm.
called star sand. And the star sand is something that I'd never heard of before. It is shaped like a star. It's little pieces of protozoa that live in the ocean. They get pulled up by the waves and then they get stuffed on the shore. Well, they die. When they
Mm-hmm.
die, their exoskeleton or whatever it is becomes star sand. And there are only a few beaches in the world that have this star sand, and they happen to be on Guam.
What color is it?
It can be tan or brown or white. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it looks pink.
I would think so. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking that. Mm-hmm.
And it was my first experience on a beach in Guam. So I know that every time I go out, I wear sneakers.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a book that is written by somebody that says swimming in sneakers. I have swim shoes, which I use when I'm swimming in Guam.
This sounds so
Guam.
beautiful.
It is. And the water is just absolutely clear. You can see all the way down to the bottom. And when I was on Cocos Island that time, I was my first time parasailing. I don't know why I did it. I did it. But
Do you have photos of parasailing?
yes,
Wow, I'd like to see those sometime.
I was in the air looking down at the water, and this big, great, big fish, huge fish. I watched it as it went under the water. It was absolutely gorgeous.
And you could see that because the water was so clear.
The water was very clear. On that day there was no wave or anything. I learned to snorkel there too,
Hmm.
because I'm not a swimmer. I actually learned to swim while I was in Guam and I was 60 years old. We went snorkeling and I went with my swimming teacher and I went too close to a fish. The fish bit me,
Wow.
believe it or not. Beautiful, beautiful fish. It was a parrotfish and it bit my fingertip. And it felt like when you have a fingernail clipper
Uh-huh.
and
You
you
went too
mix
deep.
and you hit it felt that way. No big deal. Well, then I got out and that night it started hurting. And I went to the doctor and it was infected. And he said, "You went too close to his nest."
Oh boy. Sounds like to me it's sort of untouched. So it has a special, exciting, adventurous beauty about it.
When I first got there, I'm a military brat. And my brother was born in Hawaii in 1955. And I remember Hawaii, and Hawaii was not like it is today. Well, Guam was like Hawaii was in 1955. It's
Things.
not touristy. It might be today, however,
I'm
but it
sure.
wasn't when I was there because I've done some research on the internet and they have a lot of things now that they didn't have then that are very touristy.
Like what?
They have a huge Guam museum. They didn't have one then. They
Mm-hmm.
have a great big huge Guam museum. They have several amusement parks. They have this great big government complex now that at the time that I was there, it was just a hill. But now it's a government complex. And on this government complex are fantastic sculptures that I have seen that were not on the governor's complex, but they were on that hill. And the monuments are fantastic. The one in particular that I love is called Walking to Concentration Camp. It was done by Lisa Reistad. It's a big bronze statue of a woman and a child and a baby, and the face looks like they're scared and they're concerned and they don't know what's going on. They are
Mm-hmm.
marching to a camp called Menangan. During the Second World War, the Japanese invaded Guam the day after they invaded Hawaii. And we in the United States didn't even pay any attention. But they invaded Guam because they wanted the island and it was part of the United States. They took over Guam and they terrorized it for 3 years. And we've met people who were terrorized. They took all of the people, they were called Chamorro. They took all of the Chamorro people and said, "You've got to get out of here and we're taking you to Menangan." So they all went to Menangan. There were 18,000 of them. And they marched them through the jungle without food, without water, If they fell, they killed them. And then they went and all lived in Menangan. This statue that is in the governor's complex shows that fear on their faces as they go. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful monument that shows how the people felt on the fear of the complex. And think about it, it's a concentration camp.
Yeah.
We think only that the Germans had concentration camps. No, the Japanese did too. And they were ready to kill everybody. They like to behead people. So the history of Guam is fascinating, not just World War II, but also you see latte stones. Latte stones are ancient. They're 3,000 years ago. The original Guamanians came from Philippines and places like that, and they landed in Guam and they set up their settlements in Guam. They built what's called latte stones. They're stone structures, and there's a big stone structure on the bottom, which is called a latte. And then they put another stone on top of that called a talo. And from that latte and the talo, they put then coconut and pandama leaves that they wove together to make houses. And so the houses sit on top of these rocks, and they had a wonderful society doing with this. All kinds of people all over the island had little latte villages. And the Spanish came, Magellan came, and then the missionaries came, and they got rid of most everything that they could of the Chamorro culture. And so the Chamorro people integrated into the Spanish culture, but they didn't leave the Chamorro. So they have now combined Chamorro with Spanish and American. And it's just the people are so fantastic. They're friendly. They care about you. They invite you to think. The first week we were there, we were invited to a fiesta. People are so friendly.
It sounds like a beautiful culture. Do you think you're ever going to get back to Guam?
No.
Oh, rats. You answered no too quickly, Margaret.
Well, traveling for me is not something I can do anymore. Right. It's too hard for me.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Can you read something from your manuscript?
Sure. This is called PT Guns Guam. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Joel said as we walked out of the door from our 12-story apartment in Tamaning, Guam. Just a minute, I need to put on bug spray, I yelled back. Joel and I entered the elevator. I went pony stomping yesterday, he said. I want to show you the PT guns. Where are they? In the jungle, I bet. Yep. PT is located before we get to Big Navy. Joel drove our Toyota to Marine Corps Drive, made a turn on to Route 6 at the Veterans Cemetery, and then made an immediate left turn to Assumption Drive, where we stopped to look over the area toward Asan Park, where the Americans landed during the Second Battle of Guam in 1944. Remember, I hiked the exact route the soldiers took when they invaded Guam. It must have been horrendous, he said. Looking over the jungle behind us, I wondered how anyone could get through such jungle of bush. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, took a sip of water from our ever-present water bottle, and gazed over the slope of homes, looking toward the bay, imagining a fleet of warships and soldiers pouring onto the shore. How frightened they must have been. Let's find the church, Joel said as he got into the car. The trailhead is behind the church. We parked in the lot at the Our Lady of Assumption Church. A sign posted just at the start of the back area jungle showed a black and white picture of soldiers walking into the jungle ready for battle. In Chamorro, English and Japanese, the sign said, the Imperial Japanese had fortified the island entirely with guns like the ones on PT. These are the position they were found after the liberation of the island. Despite being the only remaining guns, they were never fired during the battle. The Japanese were in the process of hauling the new guns up the hill to be installed by Chamorro slave laborers, but the invasion happened before they could complete their work, so the guns were abandoned. Joe led the way up the steps. I walked slowly, holding onto the handbars and looking over the green of the mahogany forest while listening to the ribbits of tree frogs and crickets. An occasional gecko dashed across the steps, but I saw no other wildlife. We climbed the steep slope for a quarter mile. By the time we came out onto the forest floor where the guns had laid waiting, I was huffing. A sign beside the first gun noted that the mahogany forest we had just traveled through had been planted in 1920 as part of an experimental station on the island. Mahogany is not a native. The sign also said these were coastal defense guns for the Imperial Japanese that overlooked Asan Bay. The area is part of the War on the Pacific National Historical Park. The 3 guns were in bad condition. They lay in pieces. Joel spent minutes walking around each one examining it, but I don't know what. Having been in the military, I assume he is interested in stuff like this. I am interested only in the history.
Nice. Good descriptions. Really good descriptions.
Mhm.
And history, it's a bittersweet feel, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a nice setting, but when you think about where you were visiting and what was happening
Yes.
before, it's
Mhm.
it's a compelling bittersweet scene.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something else. What about brown tree snakes? Tell me about brown tree snakes.
Before we went to Guam, my brother, who had lived in Guam, told me that brown tree snakes were all over the place, that they were interrupting with the electricity and they were all over. Well, you know what? I saw 3 brown tree snakes in 3 years.
Oh,
But I noticed every fence, especially those around the military bases, have these little boxes sitting on the fence. They're snake catchers. And the snake would go, they put a mouse in that catch, in that box. And I did write about it in the book. The snake then goes up for the mouse. The snake can't get out, can't even get the mouse. But that's one way they got rid of the snakes. The snakes ate all the birds.
that sounds terrible.
So the island had no birds for a long time. Now, Cocos Island had birds because snakes couldn't get over there. They couldn't swim in the water. But now they have at Ratidian National Park, which is fantastic, they have a brown tree snake research center, which we visited. And they explained to us how they were getting rid of their brown tree snakes and how they were trying to take care of that. I read just last week the Marines are coming into an area that was infiltrated with brown tree snakes, and they had to go in there and get rid of the brown tree snakes before they could even do the construction for the Marine compound.
Hmm.
A friend of mine said when he was a little boy, he used to go out and find brown tree snakes, and he would get paid for them. So the
Oh,
government was trying to get rid of them. They came over probably as hitchhiking on planes that came in from New Guinea, and they're not native. They came probably hitchhiking on that, and then they just had no natural enemies and they exploded. They are not particularly dangerous. They don't like people. So they're going to get away
that's
from us before we get
that's
away
not
from
a
them.
good that's not a good thing.
Well, that means they're scared of us.
Yeah.
They come out at night. They don't come out during the day. They have fangs. They don't rattle. They do bite, but what they do is when they bite, they clip onto something and they chew. And
Great.
they chew. It's very hard to get them off of you. They chew and then you get infected.
Oh.
You go to the hospital and they just give you a shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's no big deal.
Do they climb brown trees? Is that why they're called brown tree?
No, they're just called brown tree snakes. I don't know why.
Huh. That's interesting. All right. Well, we've talked about your book. Listen to you read a scene from your book, and we appreciate that. We know that this new book about Guam, Your Passion, Guam, will be coming out in 2021. We referenced a little bit about the pandemic and how you and I are both hunkering down and taking advantage of this opportunity and
Right,
writing
to
and writing
write.
and writing and writing. So, and the benefit of having a writers group. Now, for those of the listeners out there, I hope if you are a writer or a writer wannabe that you take advantage of fellow writers where you can learn more about your craft just by talking to one another.
And don't be afraid to write.
I wanted to ask, tell me a little bit more about that before we end this
Hmm.
interview. Daggone it, Margaret, you and I could talk all day, but
Right,
um,
we could.
we could. So I appreciate it so much.
Yes.
So, what is the one thing you would like readers to know?
Don't be afraid to write. Just sit down and write. And even if you don't write or you can't write because your hands shake too much, record it in some way. Use the iPad, use your cell phone, record it, and then it will write it for you. Writing is a cathartic thing.
Mm-hmm.
If something has happened to you, a divorce or a death, if you sit down and write about it, it will help you overcome it. It helped me overcome many things. And I think that that's very important. Writing is an important skill, and you don't have to be afraid. You write, it's for you.
When you talk to someone who's worried and wants to tell a story but says, I don't know
Mhm.
how to write,
Right.
what do you tell them about editing themselves as they write? Do you comment on that?
Mm. Well, I edit myself all the time when I'm writing,
Mm-hmm.
but other people don't need to. Just sit down and write. Write like you talk.
Mm-hmm.
I have books and books and books of things that I don't let anybody else read because they're awful. I've been writing since I was a little girl, and I just write what I feel like writing about.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always make any sense to anybody, but it's there. I hone my skill through always writing. If you have a story, you need to let it out.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows your story until you tell them. And you might think, well, nobody cares about my story. People care about your story. You are our history. And when you're gone, that part of our history is gone unless you have it written down somewhere for somebody to see.
As the older I get,
Hmm.
the more I understand the importance of it. I mean,
Yes.
I'm interested in writing initially because I just wanted to sort of learn how to write and have a sense of
Hmm.
accomplishment.
Right.
And then what happened to me when I didn't write, I felt unbalanced, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yes, it
And I
does.
had to, it was like I had to gravitate back. I had to get back in there to writing because I don't
That's right.
know. And I
Hmm.
don't know. And some of the thing, when we write, even if it's not a memoir,
Hmm.
we still are telling something about ourselves because
That's right.
that's where we get what we're writing about, even though
Right.
it's creative and it's not
Yep.
necessarily about my life.
Hmm.
It still gets inside of me and it comes
Hmm.
out of me, good,
Right.
bad, or indifferent. And when I don't do
Hmm.
it, I am a little off center and I don't necessarily realize it until I think, well, I don't know, I'm having trouble concentrating or something.
Yeah.
And then I realize, you just
Yep.
need to write. And then that's what I do. It's hard to get back into it if
Hmm.
I've skipped a couple of weeks. But as you
Hmm.
and I were chatting before we started
Hmm.
recording, it's like for me, it's like riding a bicycle. And I think it's like that with everyone
Hmm.
that you ride your bicycle, and then you put it away and then you pull it back out. You may get
Hmm.
stiff when you're riding that bicycle. You may
Yeah.
not have exactly the balance or the steering that you had before, but soon it's a breeze again. One caveat: riding isn't a breeze, but it,
Writing is hard work.
it is for me.
It is hard work.
I always say it's excruciating and exhilarating
Yes.
if you can hold those two
Hmm.
emotions at the same time.
Right.
It's really challenging
Hmm.
and it gives me my greatest joy.
And you
Maybe,
write for yourself. You don't write for somebody else. You write for yourself.
yeah, and see, that's a really important point. Many people worry about their audience when they just need to write what they need to write,
Yeah.
not worry about who's going to read it.
Right.
I mean, at some point, if you choose to work with Margaret, for example, and write your memoir, at some point when you're finished and when it's edited and all that, that's when you take in consideration the audience.
Right.
And the audience can just be yourself or your family, or it can be a broader group of people, right?
Right.
Thank you
And
so
when you sit down and say, well, nobody cares, somebody cares.
Yeah. I don't care that nobody cares. I mean, if you said to
That's
me,
right.
nobody cares, I don't care that nobody cares because I'm writing my stuff. When you finished your first book, don't you think, Margaret, when I finished, well, I finished 2 books, but when I finished my first book, I just coasted. I was coasting for months at that accomplishment. And it didn't even matter to me, thank goodness, about the quality of the work. I mean, I just didn't, I wanted it to be uncringeworthy, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
When I write the book and you read it, Margaret, I just didn't want to cringe at the thought of your reading it. That was my
Right.
bar for
Right.
quality. Did you feel that way when you finished your first book?
My first book, Unsung Hero, was about my father, and it was cathartic. My brother and I worked on it together, and we, after Daddy died, we came out of it with more love for our father and more understanding of him. Then I won an award.
Yes, tell us about that.
I was shocked. I thought, how is this possible? And I won an award. And so then I wrote the second book, which I had been writing for 30 years. It was my own memoir, which was difficult to write, very difficult to write. And I finally did get it finished, and I got it published, and I won the award again.
Ding, ding, ding. Best author.
Unbelievable. Now, the
Congratulations.
Guam book, it should win an award, but whether it will or not is another thing. But it should, because it's great.
Yeah, that's good. I love your sense of self as a writer. I appreciate that so much. Well, I thank you for spending time with me today, and I'm so glad you came back for the second interview. You talked about Guam during the first interview. It was very intriguing, and so I'm glad that even though you haven't finished the book, I'm glad you stopped to talk to us in the midst of the book.
Yes.
That's a little teaser for us. I want you to promise me that you're going to come back after the book is published.
Oh, I would love to.
That would be great.
And maybe it'll win an award.
Maybe it'll win an award. Why not? You're on a roll. 2 books, 2 awards. I mean, come on. If I were near you, I'd touch you and
you turn into gold.
Yes, that's right. I want to touch you so I can get some of your skills and some of your abilities. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay.
Stay safe, stay healthy, keep writing, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to In the Know. If you would like to support the show, you can do so by subscribing and sharing it with your family and friends. You can like this episode, leave a comment, and even add a rating. Your support is very important to the success of In the Know. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.